The crimson sand of Kepler, 442b stretched endlessly under twin suns, painted with the aftermath of what could only be called a massacre. Corpses of both human and Zephyrian forces lay scattered across the battlefield like broken toys discarded by an angry child. The acrid smell of plasma burns and spilled blood hung heavy in the air, mixing with the metallic tang that always followed large-scale combat. Sergeant Marcus Chun moved carefully through the debris field, his combat armor systems scanning for survivors among the carnage. The 3rd Human Expeditionary Force had taken heavy losses during the failed assault on the Zephyrian mining facility, and now he found himself alone, separated from his unit during the chaotic retreat. His helmet's display showed no friendly signals within a 5-kilometer radius. The battle had been brutal beyond imagination. The Zephyrians, a warrior race known throughout the galaxy for their ferocity and honor-bound culture, had defended their position with typical ruthlessness. Their towering, reptilian forms and advanced energy weapons had torn through human ranks like paper. Yet somehow, impossibly, both sides had managed to destroy each other almost completely. Marcus paused beside a crater where a human transport had been vaporized by Zephyrian artillery. The twisted metal still glowed with residual heat. His water reserves were running low, and his suit's power cells showed only 6 hours remaining. Standard protocol demanded he find shelter and wait for extraction, but something compelled him to keep searching through the wasteland of death. A faint sound caught his attention through his helmet's audio pickups. It was barely audible over the wind that swept across the desolate battlefield, but it sounded almost like breathing. Heavy, labored breathing that spoke of pain and desperation. Marcus activated his suit's enhanced hearing and turned slowly, trying to locate the source. There, partially buried under the collapsed remains of a Zephyrian war machine, something moved. Marcus approached cautiously, his rifle ready. As he drew closer, he could make out the distinctive scaled hide and elongated limbs of a Zephyrian warrior. The alien's armor was cracked and blackened, with several pieces completely missing. Dark purple blood pooled beneath the creature's massive form. The Zephyrian was alive, but barely. Its breathing was shallow and irregular, each breath a visible struggle. One of its 4 arms hung at an impossible angle, clearly broken. Burns covered much of its exposed skin, and a deep gash ran along its torso where armor plating had been torn away. The creature's eyes, large and golden with vertical pupils, stared unseeing at the sky above. Marcus had never seen a Zephyrian this close, without active combat between them. The alien was enormous, easily 3 meters tall even while lying down, with muscles that spoke of incredible strength. Its face was elongated and predatory, with rows of sharp teeth visible through slightly parted lips. Everything about the creature's design seemed built for war and violence. For a moment, Marcus hesitated. This was the enemy. These beings had killed thousands of humans across dozens of worlds. They showed no mercy to prisoners and expected none in return. Standard military doctrine was clear. Wounded enemy combatants were to be ignored unless they posed a continued threat. Resources were too precious to waste on alien wounded. But something in those golden eyes stopped him cold. There was intelligence there, and more than that, there was awareness. The Zephyrian knew it was dying. There was no fear in its gaze, only a kind of resigned acceptance that spoke of a warrior's dignity even in defeat. The creature had fought honorably and was prepared to die the same way. Marcus found himself kneeling beside the alien despite every instinct screaming at him to walk away. Up close, he could see the full extent of the creature's injuries. Internal bleeding was obvious from the way its abdomen was distended, and the unnatural angle of its leg suggested a compound fracture. Without immediate medical attention, the Zephyrian would be dead within the hour. The alien's eyes focused on Marcus with visible effort. Those vertical pupils contracted as they fixed on his face through his helmet's visor. For a long moment, human and Zephyrian simply stared at each other across the vast gulf of species and circumstance that separated them. Neither moved, neither spoke, but something passed between them in that shared gaze. Marcus activated his suit's translation protocol, though he had never tried to communicate with a Zephyrian before. The software was designed for diplomatic contact, not battlefield encounters, but it might work. When he spoke, his words were translated into the complex series of clicks, hisses, and growls that comprised the Zephyrian language. "Can you understand me?" Marcus asked, his voice emerging from his suit's speakers in alien syllables. The Zephyrian's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across its reptilian features. It tried to respond, but only managed a weak series of sounds that the translator struggled to interpret. Finally, the words came through Marcus's headset. "Human speaks the old tongue. I'm using a translation device," Marcus explained, not sure why he felt the need to clarify. "You're badly injured. Without help, you'll die here." A sound emerged from the alien's throat that might have been laughter, though it came out as more of a wheeze. "Death comes for all warriors. I have no fear." Marcus checked his suit's medical scanners, though they were designed for human physiology. Still, they could detect basic vital signs from most carbon-based life forms. What he saw made his blood run cold. The Zephyrian's life signs were fading rapidly. Massive internal trauma, severe blood loss, and what looked like system shock from multiple injuries. Even with the best human medical technology, saving this creature would be nearly impossible. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure why it mattered. The alien's breathing became even more labored as it tried to respond. "Krex, Tarvaldek of the 4th Talon." Each word seemed to cost enormous effort. "I'm Sergeant Marcus Chun, 3rd Human Expeditionary Force." Marcus replied formally, following military protocol even in this surreal situation. Krex's golden eyes studied Marcus with what might have been curiosity. Why does a human speak to the dying enemy? It was a fair question, and Marcus wasn't entirely sure he had a good answer. Standing orders were clear about contact with alien combatants. His training had emphasized that Zephyrians were dangerous even when wounded, capable of devastating attacks if underestimated. Every tactical manual stressed that these beings were fundamentally different from humans, driven by alien psychology and hostile intent. Yet looking into those intelligent eyes, Marcus found himself questioning everything he had been taught. This wasn't a mindless monster or an incomprehensible alien intelligence. This was a soldier not so different from himself, dying alone on a battlefield far from home. The creature had fought with honor and faced death with dignity. In that moment, species seemed less important than the shared experience of warfare and mortality. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "Maybe because dying alone is wrong, no matter who you are." Something shifted in Krex's expression, a flicker of what might have been respect or gratitude. "Humans are strange creatures. Your species fights like demons, yet shows mercy to enemies." Marcus almost laughed at the irony. Mercy was not a word most humans would associate with their military doctrine, especially regarding the Zephyrian conflict. The war had been marked by brutal efficiency on both sides, with little room for humanitarian considerations. Yet here he was, contemplating whether to help an enemy warrior who should by all rights be left to die. His suit's proximity alarm suddenly activated, indicating movement in the distance. Marcus immediately raised his rifle and scanned the horizon through his scope. A dust cloud was approaching from the east, too large to be a single vehicle, but too small for a major military convoy. Probably a patrol or scavenging party looking for survivors and salvage. "Someone's coming," Marcus told Krex, though he kept his weapon trained on the approaching vehicles. "Could be human, could be Zephyrian." Krex tried to lift his head to look, but lacked the strength. "If Zephyrian, they will grant me warrior's death. If human, they will leave me to die slowly." The vehicles resolved into 3 human APCs, their armor scarred from recent combat. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as he recognized the markings of the 47th Mechanized Infantry. They were allies, but that didn't necessarily mean they would approve of his current situation. Finding a human soldier tending to a wounded Zephyrian would raise serious questions about his judgment and loyalty. Marcus faced a choice that would define not just the next few minutes, but potentially the rest of his military career. He could step away from the dying alien and report his position to the approaching patrol. No one would question his decision to leave an enemy combatant to die of his wounds. It was standard procedure, expected behavior for any professional soldier. Or he could take a stand that would mark him as either exceptionally compassionate or dangerously naive, depending on who judged his actions. The approaching vehicles would arrive within minutes, and whatever decision he made would have to be made now, with no time for careful consideration of consequences. Krex seemed to sense his internal struggle. Go, human warrior, your kind approaches. Do not let them find you with dying enemy. It will bring you shame. The alien's concern for Marcus's welfare, even while facing his own death, struck something deep in the sergeant's chest. Here was an enemy showing more consideration for his well-being than many of his own commanders had demonstrated during the long years of war. It crystallized something that had been building in Marcus's mind since he first knelt beside the wounded warrior. No, Marcus said firmly, checking his medical supplies. No one dies alone on my watch. Not human, not Zephyrian, not anyone. He activated his suit's emergency medical protocols and began pulling trauma supplies from his combat pack. The approaching vehicles were still several minutes away, enough time to at least stabilize the worst of Krex's injuries if he worked quickly. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, sealing the worst bleeding and injecting universal coagulants designed to work across multiple species. Krex watched with growing amazement as Marcus worked to save his life. Why do this for enemy? Marcus paused in his work, looking directly into those golden eyes. Because maybe it's time we stop being enemies. The lead APC ground to a halt 20 meters away, its heavy tracks churning up clouds of red dust that hung in the thin atmosphere like a crimson fog. Marcus continued working on Krex's wounds, even as he heard the mechanical whine of the vehicle's rear hatch opening. Boots hit the ground with metallic clanks, and he could hear the distinctive sound of weapons being readied. Contact. Human survivor at grid reference 77 Alpha. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, a by-the-book officer Marcus knew from joint operations. Her tone carried the sharp edge of someone who had seen too much combat in too short a time. Weapons hot. Approach with caution. Marcus didn't look up from his work. He had managed to seal the worst of Krex's external bleeding and was now injecting a broad-spectrum antibiotic that should work on Zephyrian physiology. The alien's breathing had stabilized slightly, though his condition remained critical. Every second counted if there was any hope of keeping him alive. Sergeant Chun, step away from the hostile and report. Lieutenant Mitchell's voice was closer now, probably no more than 10 meters away. Marcus could hear the tension in her words, the disbelief at what she was witnessing. That's a direct order. Finally, Marcus looked up to see 4 soldiers in full combat gear with weapons trained not on Krex, but on him. Their faces were hidden behind tactical visors, but their body language spoke of confusion and barely contained hostility. Lieutenant Mitchell stood slightly ahead of the others, her rifle lowered, but ready to snap into position at the first sign of trouble. Ma'am, this alien is critically wounded and poses no threat, Marcus said calmly, returning to his medical work. I'm providing emergency aid as per the Geneva Convention protocols for wounded combatants. The Geneva Convention doesn't apply to non-human combatants, Sergeant, Mitchell replied sharply. And need I remind you that these creatures have shown no such consideration for our wounded? Step away immediately. Krex's golden eyes moved between Marcus and the other humans, taking in the tense situation with remarkable clarity for someone so badly injured. He tried to speak, but only managed a weak series of clicks and hisses that the translation system struggled to interpret. Finally, the words came through clearly enough. Human warrior, save yourself. Leave Krex to die with honor. The other soldiers shifted nervously at the sound of the alien voice. Corporal Davis, a young soldier Marcus remembered from basic training, took an involuntary step backward. Jesus Christ, Lieutenant, the thing can talk. They're all capable of communication, Davis. Mitchell snapped without taking her eyes off Marcus. That doesn't make them any less dangerous. Chun, I won't ask again. Step away from the hostile. Marcus finished injecting the antibiotic and moved to examine Krex's broken leg. The fracture was compound, with bone fragments visible through torn flesh and scales. Without proper surgical intervention, the limb would have to be amputated, assuming Krex survived long enough for such procedures. The alien's pain must have been excruciating, yet he made no sound of complaint. Permission to speak freely, ma'am? Marcus asked without looking up. Mitchell's silence stretched for several seconds before she responded curtly. Granted. This warrior fought with honor against overwhelming odds. He's shown courage and dignity even while dying. Maybe it's time we showed the same qualities our enemies demonstrate. Marcus carefully splinted the broken leg using materials from his field kit. I've seen too much death today, ma'am. Too much unnecessary killing. If we can save one life, even an enemy life, maybe that means something. It means you're suffering from combat stress and making poor tactical decisions, Mitchell replied, though her voice had lost some of its sharp edge. That creature's people have been at war with humanity for 15 years. They've killed millions of our citizens across dozens of worlds. They don't take prisoners, they don't show mercy, and they certainly don't provide medical aid to wounded humans. Krex managed to turn his head slightly toward the lieutenant, his golden eyes focusing with obvious effort. When he spoke, his voice was weak but clear through the translation system. Human leader speaks truth. My people know only warrior's path. But this one, he looked back at Marcus. This one shows different way. The admission seemed to surprise Mitchell more than Marcus's actions had. She lowered her rifle completely and took a step closer, studying the wounded Zephyrian with professional curiosity. You're saying your people have never encountered this kind of behavior from humans before? Never, Krex confirmed, each word a visible struggle. Humans fight with great skill, great fury, but show mercy to dying enemy. This is unknown thing. Private Rodriguez, the youngest member of Mitchell's squad, spoke up hesitantly. Ma'am, what if this changes things? What if showing mercy actually makes a difference? Mitchell shot him a sharp look that suggested speaking out of turn was not appreciated, but her expression thoughtful rather than angry. The lieutenant had built her career on following orders and maintaining discipline, but she was also intelligent enough to recognize when circumstances fell outside normal parameters. This situation definitely qualified as abnormal by any reasonable standard. The alien's right about one thing, she said finally. In 15 years of war, there's never been a documented case of either side providing aid to enemy wounded. Both species have been locked in a cycle of escalating brutality that's cost millions of lives on both sides. Marcus finally looked up from his work, meeting Mitchell's gaze directly. Then, maybe it's time to break that cycle, ma'am. Maybe someone has to be the first to show there's another way. Or maybe you're being naive about the nature of our enemy, Mitchell countered, but her tone suggested she was considering his words rather than dismissing them outright. These beings have shown themselves capable of incredible violence. Their entire culture seems built around warfare and conquest. Krex made a sound that might have been laughter, though it came out as more of a wheeze. Humans speaks of violence, of conquest. Yet humans crossed void between stars to claim worlds that were not theirs. The alien's eyes fixed on Mitchell with surprising intensity. Both peoples are warriors. Both seek what others possess. The uncomfortable truth in Krex's words created an awkward silence among the human soldiers. The war had begun when human colonists attempted to establish settlements on worlds that Zephyrian clans considered part of their traditional territory. Both sides could claim legitimate grievances, though those details have been lost in 15 years of increasing brutality and hatred. That's not the point, Mitchell said, though with less conviction than before. The point is that providing aid to enemy combatants violates standing orders and potentially compromises operational security. With respect, ma'am, standing orders also say to leave no wounded behind, Marcus replied. They don't specify species. Mitchell opened her mouth to respond, then closed it as she considered the implications. Military doctrine was indeed clear about the treatment of wounded personnel, though it had obviously been written with human casualties in mind. The legal and ethical questions surrounding alien combatants had never been properly addressed by command structure. Corporal Davis had been monitoring their communications array and now approached with obvious urgency. Lieutenant, we're receiving priority transmissions from command. Multiple channels, highest encryption. They want immediate status reports from all surviving units. Mitchell activated her own comm system and moved away from the group to take the call. Marcus could hear fragments of the conversation, but the encryption protocols made most of it unintelligible. What he could make out suggested that the tactical situation had changed dramatically since the battle ended. Krex had been listening as well, his enhanced hearing apparently capable of picking up more details than human ears could detect. Your leaders speak of new developments. Something has changed in the Greater War. What do you mean? Marcus asked, pausing in his examination of the alien's torso wound. Signals from many worlds. Reports of great defeat somewhere far from here. Crex's breathing became more labored as he spoke. My people also receive such signals. The war may be ending. Mitchell returned from her communication with a grim expression that suggested the news had not been encouraging. Orders have changed, she announced. We're to secure all battlefield intelligence and prepare for immediate evacuation. Apparently, there's been a major development in the Centauri sector. What kind of development? Rodriguez asked. The kind that makes salvaging alien technology and intelligence a top priority, Mitchell replied cryptically. Command wants everything we can gather about Zephyrian capabilities and tactics. Her eyes fell on Crex with a new intensity, including live subjects for interrogation. Marcus felt his blood run cold at the implication. Ma'am, this warrior is critically wounded. He needs medical attention, not interrogation. That's not our call to make, Sergeant, Mitchell said firmly. Command has authorized the use of enhanced interrogation techniques to extract strategic intelligence from captured Zephyrian personnel. This alien could provide valuable information about their military structure and capabilities. Crex had understood enough of the conversation to grasp what was being discussed. His golden eyes met Marcus's with resigned understanding. So, the mercy was temporary. Your leaders still seek only victory through pain and fear. That's not true, Marcus protested, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. Ma'am, enhanced interrogation of a wounded prisoner violates multiple international treaties. Even if those treaties don't specifically cover alien combatants, the principles still apply. Mitchell's expression hardened. Our principles didn't stop the Zephyrians from massacring the civilian population of New Geneva. They didn't prevent the biological weapons attacks on our agricultural worlds. Thousands of human children died from Zephyrian toxins. Sergeant, remember that before you get too concerned about alien rights. The lieutenant's words carried the weight of personal loss, and Marcus recognized the pain behind her anger. New Geneva had been one of the war's worst atrocities, with an entire city of 200,000 civilians killed in a matter of hours. If Mitchell had family or friends there, her hatred for the Zephyrians would be deeply personal. I remember, Marcus said quietly. I also remember that we're supposed to be better than our enemies. If we use their tactics, if we become as brutal as they are, then what exactly are we fighting to preserve? We're fighting to survive, Mitchell snapped. And if that requires making hard choices about alien prisoners, then that's what we'll do. Crex spoke up again, his voice weaker than before, but still clear enough for the translation system to interpret. Human warrior, Marcus, you have shown great honor. Do not let my fate burden your conscience. Warriors understand the necessities of war. The alien's acceptance of his likely fate only made Marcus more determined to prevent it. There had to be another way, some alternative that didn't require abandoning the principles that supposedly separated humans from their enemies. The fact that Crex was prepared to face torture and death with dignity only emphasized how wrong it would be to subject him to such treatment. Ma'am, request permission to transport the prisoner for proper medical treatment, Marcus said formally. If he's going to be interrogated, keeping him alive should be the priority. Mitchell considered this for several seconds, her internal struggle visible on her face. Finally, she nodded reluctantly. Granted, but understand that any intelligence he provides could save human lives. That has to be our first consideration. As Marcus prepared Crex for transport, the alien managed to grip his arm with surprising strength. Whatever comes, I am grateful for your kindness. It changes how I see your people. Marcus looked into those golden eyes one more time, seeing intelligence, dignity, and something that might have been hope. It's going to change how we see each other, he replied. I promise you that. The medical bay aboard the UES Prometheus hummed with activity as Marcus watched the surgical team work on Crex. The Zephyrian warrior lay unconscious on an adaptive medical table, his massive form barely fitting within the confines of equipment designed for human patients. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's chief medical officer, moved with practiced efficiency despite having never operated on an alien before. His physiology is remarkably similar to Earth reptiles, but with some fascinating adaptations, Dr. Vasquez explained as she worked. Multiple hearts to support his size, redundant organ systems, and a healing factor that's frankly incredible. He should have died from blood loss hours ago. Marcus stood at the observation window, still in his combat armor, though he had removed his helmet. The past 6 hours have been a whirlwind of evacuations, debriefings, and increasingly urgent communications from Fleet Command. The promised interrogation had been delayed pending Krex's medical stabilization, giving Marcus time to think about what came next. Lieutenant Mitchell appeared beside him, her expression unreadable. "The prisoner's surgery is going well, I see. His name is Krex," Marcus replied without looking away from the medical bay. "And yes, Dr. Vasquez says he'll survive." "Krex," Mitchell repeated thoughtfully. "You know, in 15 years of war, I don't think I've ever known the name of a single Zephyrian. They were always just hostiles or targets or the enemy." Marcus glanced at her, surprised by the reflective tone. "Does it make a difference?" "Maybe it does." Mitchell moved to stand directly in front of the window, watching as the surgical team carefully repaired damage to Krex's torso. "Command has been asking detailed questions about how we acquired this prisoner. They're particularly interested in your decision to provide medical aid." A cold feeling settled in Marcus's stomach. "Am I going to face disciplinary action?" "That depends on how this situation develops," Mitchell replied diplomatically. "There are people at the highest levels of command who see your actions as a dangerous precedent. But there are others who think you might have accidentally opened a door to something important." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the medical bay's comm system activated with an urgent chime. "All senior staff to the briefing room immediately," came the voice of Captain Rebecca Torres, the Prometheus's commanding officer. "Priority Alpha communications from Fleet Admiral Chun." Marcus felt his pulse quicken at the mention of his grandfather's name. Admiral Chun was one of the most senior officers in the human space navy, a veteran of the earliest conflicts with the Zephyrians. If he was involved in this situation, it meant the implications reached far beyond a single wounded prisoner. The briefing room was packed with officers from across the ship's command structure. Marcus found himself seated near the back, still uncertain why his presence had been requested at such a high-level meeting. The main display activated to show the weathered face of Fleet Admiral Chun, his expression grave despite the family resemblance Marcus could see in his features. "Officers of the Prometheus," Admiral Chun began without preamble, "I'm contacting you regarding the Zephyrian prisoner currently in your medical bay. This individual represents a unique opportunity that could change the entire course of our conflict." Captain Torres leaned forward in her chair. "Sir, our intelligence reports indicated standard interrogation protocols were approved for this prisoner." "Those protocols have been superseded by new developments," Admiral Chen replied. 3 hours ago, we received unprecedented communications from the Zephyrian High Command. They're requesting information about the status of one Krex Tarvaldek, 4th Talon, who was reported missing in action during the Kepler 442b engagement. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. In 15 years of warfare, neither side had ever inquired about the fate of enemy personnel. Prisoners were rarely taken by either species, and, when they were, their fates were simply accepted as part of the fortunes of war. "The significance of this communication cannot be overstated," Admiral Chun continued. "Krex Tarvaldek is apparently the son of Supreme War Leader Valdek, one of the most powerful military commanders in Zephyrian space. His capture represents the first time we've held a prisoner of such strategic importance." Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes turning toward him as officers realized he was the one who had captured this crucial prisoner. The irony was almost overwhelming. His attempt to show mercy to a dying enemy had accidentally achieved what human intelligence services had been trying to accomplish for over a decade. Moreover, Admiral Chen added, the tone of the Zephyrian communications suggests something unprecedented. They're not demanding his return or threatening retaliation for his capture. They're asking about his welfare and expressing willingness to negotiate for his safe return. Captain Torres spoke carefully. "Admiral, are you suggesting the Zephyrians are prepared to engage in prisoner exchange negotiations?" "I'm suggesting they're prepared to engage in peace negotiations, Captain," Admiral Chen replied with barely contained excitement. The Zephyrian message included preliminary proposals for a ceasefire and formal diplomatic contact. They're calling it a trial of honor, an opportunity for both species to demonstrate their worthiness as opponents rather than enemies. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. His simple act of battlefield mercy had somehow triggered the first serious peace initiative in 15 years of brutal warfare. The wounded alien he had refused to abandon might actually hold the key to ending a conflict that had claimed millions of lives. Dr. Vasquez's voice came over the comm system, interrupting the Admiral's briefing. Captain Torres, the Zephyrian patient is regaining consciousness. His vital signs are stable, and he's asking to speak with Sergeant Chun. Admiral Chin's eyes fixed on Marcus through the display. Sergeant, you may have just changed the course of galactic history. How do you feel about that responsibility? Marcus stood at attention, his mind reeling with the magnitude of what was happening. Sir, I was just trying to do the right thing. I never intended to capture anyone or start peace negotiations. Sometimes the most important moments in history happen because someone chooses to do the right thing without considering the consequences, Admiral Chin replied with what might have been pride. Report to the medical bay, Sergeant. You're our unofficial ambassador to the son of a Zephyrian supreme war leader. As Marcus made his way to the medical bay, he could hear urgent conversations breaking out behind him. Officers who had treated his actions with suspicion just hours earlier were now analyzing every detail of his encounter with Krex for diplomatic significance. The wounded alien warrior had become the most valuable prisoner in human space, and Marcus was the only person who had established any kind of rapport with him. Krex was awake when Marcus entered the medical bay, though he remained connected to various monitoring devices. The alien's golden eyes tracked Marcus's movement with alert intelligence, and his massive form seemed less threatening now that he was clean and properly treated for his injuries. Human warrior, Marcus, Krex said through the translation system, his voice stronger than it had been on the battlefield. You have brought me far from place of death. You're aboard one of our ships, Marcus explained, pulling up a chair beside the medical table. Our doctors repaired your injuries. You're going to survive. Krex's vertical pupils dilated with what might have been surprise. Your healers worked upon enemy flesh? This is most unexpected. A lot of things about this situation are unexpected, Marcus replied. Your people have been in contact with our command structure. They're asking about your welfare. The alien's reaction was immediate and dramatic. His entire body tensed, and several monitoring devices began beeping with increased activity. My father learns of my capture. This brings great shame to Tar Valdek name. Actually, it doesn't, Marcus said quickly, recognizing the distress in Krex's voice. Your father seems proud that you fought with honor. He's not angry about your capture. He's grateful that you're alive. Krex stared at Marcus for a long moment, processing this information. You speak truth. War leader Valdek does not condemn his son's failure. There was no failure, Marcus replied firmly. You fought against impossible odds and nearly died defending your position. That's not failure. That's courage. The alien's breathing gradually returned to normal as he considered Marcus's words. You understand warrior's honor, even though we are different species. Maybe we're not as different as we thought, Marcus suggested. Your people value courage, honor, and loyalty. So do we. Maybe that's enough to build something better than war. Krex turned his head to look directly at Marcus, his golden eyes intense with emotion. On battlefield, you showed mercy when you could have shown cruelty. Your people speak of peace when they could speak of vengeance. This is new thing in Galaxy. Dr. Vasquez approached with a tablet displaying Krex's medical readings. His recovery rate is remarkable, she told Marcus. At this pace, he'll be fully mobile within a week. His species has incredible resilience. Doctor, Krex said, switching his attention to Dr. Vasquez, you have healed enemy flesh. Why do you show such kindness? Dr. Vasquez smiled, the expression visible through her medical mask. Because healing is what I do. It doesn't matter if you're human, Zephyrian, or something else entirely. Life is precious, and protecting it is the most important thing any of us can do. The alien pondered her words carefully before responding. Your species confuses me greatly. You fight with terrible fury, yet show mercy to those you defeat. You seek victory, yet offer healing to enemies. Maybe that's what makes us strong enough to win wars and wise enough to end them, Marcus suggested. We fight when we have to, but we never forget that our enemies are living beings worthy of respect. Krex was quiet for several minutes, his enhanced hearing picking up sounds from throughout the ship that human ears couldn't detect. Finally, he spoke with obvious difficulty, as if the words were hard to say. I wish to send message to War Leader Valdek. Will you help me speak to my father? Marcus exchanged glances with Dr. Vasquez, both recognizing the significance of the request. If Krex was willing to communicate with his father through human channels, it could represent the first step toward genuine diplomatic contact between the species. Of course, Marcus replied. What do you want to tell him? Krex closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his strength and his thoughts. When he spoke again, his voice carried the formal cadences of official communication. Tell War Leader Valdek that his son lives because human warriors showed honor greater than any Krex has known. Tell him that these humans fight with courage of true warriors but show mercy of wise leaders. The alien paused, then continued with obvious emotion. Tell my father that perhaps it is time for Zephyrian people to learn new way of honor, the way that heals instead of only destroying. As Marcus prepared to relay this message to the command structure, he realized that they had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. The wounded alien warrior who had been prepared to die alone on a distant battlefield had become the voice of his people's desire for peace. And it had all started with a simple human decision to show mercy to a fallen enemy. The galaxy was about to change, and Marcus could only hope that humanity was ready for what came next. The neutral station Haven floated in the void between human and Zephyrian space, a hastily constructed diplomatic facility that represented 15 years of accumulated hope and desperation. Marcus stood at the observation deck, watching as massive Zephyrian warships took positions alongside human vessels in a display of tentative cooperation that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier. Krex moved up beside him, the alien's mobility fully restored thanks to Dr. Vasquez's expert care and his species' remarkable healing abilities. The Zephyrian warrior now wore formal diplomatic robes instead of battle armor, their deep purple fabric marked with golden symbols that indicated his status as an official representative of his people. Strange to see our fleets together, without weapons firing, Krex observed, his grasp of human language improving daily through intensive study sessions with the ship's linguistic specialists. Strange is one word for it, Marcus replied, still amazed at how quickly events had developed. The exchange of messages between Krex and his father had triggered a cascade of diplomatic activity that culminated in this unprecedented gathering. Are you nervous about seeing your father again? Krex's vertical pupils contracted slightly, a sign Marcus had learned indicated deep thought or emotional stress. War Leader Valdek is difficult father, even for Zephyrian standards. He expects perfection in all things, especially from his son. The alien paused, watching as a massive Zephyrian command ship maneuvered into docking position with the station. The vessel was intimidating even in peaceful circumstances, its organic-looking curves and predatory design language speaking of a culture built around warfare and conquest. But you changed my understanding of what strength means, Krex continued. Perhaps I can help him understand same thing. Marcus had spent countless hours over the past 3 weeks learning about Zephyrian culture from Krex, and the experience had fundamentally altered his perception of their former enemies. The Zephyrian people were indeed warrior-focused, but their concept of honor was far more complex than human intelligence had understood. True strength, in their philosophy, included the wisdom to know when fighting should end and healing begin. Admiral Chen's voice came over the station's comm system, addressing all personnel. Attention Haven Station. The Zephyrian diplomatic delegation has arrived and requests permission to board. All security teams to positions, all diplomatic personnel to Conference Room Alpha. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he realized the moment had finally arrived. 3 weeks of careful preparation, cultural briefings, and diplomatic protocol training had led to this. the first face-to-face meeting between high-ranking officials from both species since the war began. "Time to go make history," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice light despite the magnitude of the occasion. Krex placed one of his massive hands on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture of friendship that would have been unthinkable when they first met on that blood-soaked battlefield. "History is made by those brave enough to choose different path. You chose such path when you could have left me to die." They made their way through the station's corridors, passing human and Zephyrian personnel who were all working together with remarkable efficiency, considering they had been mortal enemies just a month earlier. The sight of humans and Zephyrians collaborating on routine tasks was surreal, but it gave Marcus hope that lasting peace might actually be possible. Conference Room Alpha was designed to accommodate both species, with adaptive seating and environmental controls that could be adjusted for different physiological requirements. A large table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by translation equipment and recording devices that would preserve every word of the historic proceedings. Admiral Chun was already present, along with several other high-ranking human officials Marcus recognized from news broadcasts and military briefings. Secretary of State Patricia Williams looked nervous but determined, while General Harrison seemed skeptical about the entire enterprise. The diversity of human perspectives represented in the room reflected the complex emotions surrounding these unprecedented negotiations. The Zephyrian delegation entered through the opposite entrance, and Marcus felt his breath catch as he got his first look at War Leader Voldek. Krex's father was enormous even by Zephyrian standards, standing nearly 4 meters tall with scales that seemed to gleam like polished metal. His presence filled the room with an almost tangible sense of power and authority. But what struck Marcus most was the expression in the war leader's golden eyes when he saw his son. Despite the alien features and reptilian physiology, the emotion was unmistakably parental love mixed with profound relief. Voldek moved directly to Krex, and father and son embraced in a gesture that transcended species barriers. "My son lives," Voldek said in heavily accented but clear English, his voice carrying harmonics that spoke of deep emotion. "The humans, they truly healed you." "More than healed, father," Krex replied, switching to English as well in a gesture of diplomatic courtesy. "They showed me new way to understand what honor means." Voldek's massive head turned toward Marcus, and the human soldier felt the weight of that alien gaze studying him with intense scrutiny. "You are the one who saved my son's life." Marcus stood at attention, unsure of the proper diplomatic protocol for addressing a Zephyrian war leader. "Yes, sir." Sergeant Marcus Chun, Human Space Navy. To his surprise, Voldek approached and performed what Marcus recognized as a formal Zephyrian bow of respect. "I am in your debt, young warrior. You showed honor when you could have shown cruelty." Admiral Chin stepped forward to formally begin the proceedings. War Leader Voldek, Secretary Williams, distinguished delegates, we gather here today to explore whether our species can find a path to peace after 15 years of devastating war. Secretary Williams activated her diplomatic translator and addressed the Zephyrian delegation directly. "War Leader, your son's situation has given us an unprecedented opportunity to understand each other better. We hope this can lead to meaningful dialogue about ending the hostilities between our peoples." Voldek's response surprised everyone in the room. Secretary Williams, "Admiral Shen Unurat Umans. My son has taught me that your species possesses qualities we had not recognized. You fight with great skill and courage, but you also show mercy to defeated enemies." The war leader paused, his massive form seeming to radiate emotional intensity. "In Zephyrian culture, we believe that true strength comes from victory over adversity. But Krex has shown me that healing can require greater strength than killing." General Harrison leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "War leader, with respect, your people have shown no mercy to human civilians. Entire colonies have been wiped out by Zephyrian forces. How do we reconcile that with your talk of honor and mercy?" Voldek's eyes flashed with what might have been anger, but his voice remained controlled. "General Harrison, you speak truth that brings shame to Zephyrian honor. In our fury, we forgot that strength includes protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The admission sent ripples of surprise through both delegations. For a Zephyrian war leader to acknowledge fault in their military conduct was unprecedented, representing a fundamental shift in their approach to the conflict. Krex spoke up, addressing both groups. "My father, my people, we have learned much from human example. You could have tortured information from captured enemy. Instead, you healed wounds and offered friendship." The young Zephyrian moved to stand between the two delegations, his presence somehow bridging the gap between species. Humans fight wars to protect what they love. Zephyrians fight wars to prove what they are. Perhaps we can fight together to build what we both need. Secretary Williams seized on the opportunity. "What exactly are you proposing, Krex?" "Joint colonies," Krex replied without hesitation. "Shared worlds where both species can live and learn from each other. Zephyrians can teach humans about honor and strength. Humans can teach Zephyrians about mercy and healing." Admiral Chun exchanged glances with the other human officials, recognizing the revolutionary nature of the proposal. Integration rather than separation, cooperation instead of conquest. It was a bold vision that would require fundamental changes in how both species viewed themselves and each other. War leader Valdek stepped forward, his massive presence commanding attention. "My son speaks with wisdom that surpasses his years. But such proposal requires great trust from both peoples. How can we build such trust after 15 years of blood and death?" Marcus found himself speaking before he could consider the diplomatic implications. "The same way we built trust between Krex and me, sir. One act of honor at a time. One choice to help instead of hurt. One decision to see the other person as worthy of respect." The room fell silent as both delegations considered his words. Marcus suddenly realized that every eye in the room was focused on him, and he felt a moment of panic at having spoken out of turn in such a crucial negotiation. But Valdek nodded slowly, a gesture that somehow conveyed deep approval. "The young sergeant speaks with warrior's wisdom. Trust is not built with words alone. It is built with actions that demonstrate honor, even when honor is difficult." Secretary Williams leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "War leader, if we were to seriously consider joint colonies, what would the Zephyrian High Command require as proof of human commitment to peace?" Valdek's response was immediate and surprising. "We require that humans continue to show mercy as Sergeant Chin showed to my son. We require that when next human and Zephyrian meet in conflict, they remember that enemies can become brothers through acts of honor." The war leader turned his golden gaze toward Marcus one more time. "We require that your species remember the warrior who chose healing over hatred on distant battlefield. That moment changed fate of entire galaxy. Such moments must become example for all our people." As the formal negotiations continued late into the station's artificial night, Marcus found himself thinking about that moment on Kepler 442b when he had knelt beside a dying alien warrior. He had never imagined that a simple act of compassion could lead to something as momentous as interspecies peace negotiations. But perhaps that was the point. The greatest changes in history often began with individuals making small choices to do the right thing, regardless of consequences. Now it remained to be seen whether those small choices could grow into something large enough to heal 15 years of wounds and build a shared future among the stars. The galaxy held its breath and waited for the answer. 5 years after the signing of the Haven Accords, the planet New Harmony represented everything the peace negotiations had promised to achieve. Human cities with their geometric precision sat alongside Zephyrian settlements with their organic, flowing architecture, creating a unique fusion of two completely different approaches to civilization. Gardens maintained by both species flourished in the shared spaces between communities, demonstrating that cooperation could create beauty neither race could achieve alone. Marcus stood on the balcony of his modest home, overlooking the Central Valley where the first mixed colony had been established. His uniform now bore the insignia of the interspecies peacekeeping force, a joint military organization dedicated to protecting the growing number of integrated worlds. At 32, he had become one of the youngest humans to achieve the rank of colonel, though his promotion had been based on diplomatic service rather than traditional military accomplishments. A familiar shadow fell across the garden as Krex approached through the morning light. The Zephyrian had grown even more massive over the years, his scales now bearing the ceremonial scarification marks of a peacebearer, the highest honor his people could bestow on someone who had contributed to ending warfare. He moved with the fluid grace that characterized his species, though Marcus noticed a slight favor of his left leg where the old battlefield injury had never quite healed properly. The morning report from the orbital stations, Krex said, offering Marcus a data tablet designed to accommodate both human and Zephyrian interfaces. 3 more worlds have requested admission to the Alliance. The movement spreads faster than even the optimists predicted. Marcus accepted the tablet and scrolled through the latest diplomatic updates. The Terran-Zephyrian alliance had grown from a tentative ceasefire to a thriving interspecies civilization that now encompassed over 40 worlds. Trade flowed freely between human and Zephyrian territories, bringing prosperity that neither species had experienced during the long years of war. Any problems with integration on the new worlds? Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer would be positive. After 5 years, the protocols for establishing mixed colonies had been refined to near perfection. Minor cultural adjustments only, Krex replied, settling his massive form onto the reinforced seating Marcus had installed to accommodate his friend's visits. The humans on Kepler 186F are struggling to adapt to Zephyrian hunting traditions, but the local peacebearers are working with human cultural liaisons to find compromises. Marcus smiled at the description. The transformation in how both species approached cultural differences had been remarkable to witness. Where once such issues would have led to violence and mistrust, they now generated collaborative problem-solving and creative adaptation. It wasn't always easy, but the results consistently proved that cooperation was more effective than conflict. Speaking of cultural integration, Krex continued, "My father has asked me to extend a formal invitation for you to attend the ceremony of renewed honor next month. He wishes to publicly recognize your contribution to what he calls the great healing between our peoples." The invitation represented a tremendous honor, considering that the ceremony of renewed honor was the most sacred ritual in Zephyrian culture. Originally designed to mark the end of blood feuds between clans, it had been adapted to celebrate the end of the war between species. For war leader Valdek to invite a human to participate was unprecedented. "I'm deeply honored," Marcus replied, meaning every word, "though I still think your father gives me too much credit for what happened. I just made one decision on one battlefield. Everything else came from people much wiser than me." Krex's expression, as much as Marcus had learned to read Zephyrian facial expressions, showed gentle disagreement. "You underestimate the power of individual choices, my friend. Every great change in history begins with someone choosing differently than expected. You chose mercy when cruelty was easier." That choice echoed across the galaxy. A soft chime from Marcus's personal communicator indicated an incoming priority message. The display showed Admiral Chen's face, though his grandfather had aged considerably during the stressful years of peace negotiations and integration planning. The burden of helping to shepherd 2 species toward cooperation had taken its toll, but the satisfaction in his eyes was unmistakable. "Marcus, I hope I'm not interrupting your morning," Admiral Chen said. "I have news that I wanted to share personally before it becomes public." "Of course, sir. What's happening?" "The Zephyrian High Command has approved the joint deep space exploration initiative we've been discussing," Admiral Chen announced with barely contained excitement. "Ships from both species will work together to explore beyond the current borders of known space. It's the largest cooperative venture we've ever attempted." Marcus felt his pulse quicken with excitement. The joint exploration program had been proposed as the ultimate test of interspecies cooperation. Crews from both races working together in the dangerous environment of deep space, dependent on each other for survival and success. If it worked, it would prove that humans and Zephyrians could truly function as partners rather than merely peaceful neighbors. "Who will command the expedition?" Marcus asked. Admiral Chen's smile widened. "That's why I'm calling personally. The High Command has requested that you and Krex serve as joint expedition leaders. They want the team that started this whole peace process to lead the next phase of interspecies development. Marcus looked at Krex, seeing his own excitement reflected in the alien's golden eyes. The prospect of exploring unknown space was thrilling enough, but doing it as partners with former enemies who had become trusted friends represented something even more significant. "When do we leave?" Krex asked, his improved English now allowing him to participate directly in the conversation. 6 months for preparation and crew selection, Admiral Chen replied. "You'll have access to the best personnel from both species, plus the most advanced technology our combined efforts have produced. This mission will be humanity and Zephyrian cooperation at its finest." After the call ended, Marcus and Krex sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both contemplating the magnitude of what lay ahead. The joint expedition would face unknown dangers in uncharted space, but it would also have the benefit of combined human ingenuity and Zephyrian resilience. The partnership that had begun with Battlefield Mercy might now unlock the secrets of the galaxy itself. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had walked past me on that battlefield?" Krex asked eventually. Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think about it sometimes. We'd probably still be at war, both species bleeding ourselves to death for the pride of claiming victory. Millions more would have died, and the galaxy would be a much darker place. Yet you made a different choice," Krex observed. "Despite training that taught you to see my people as enemies, despite orders that would have supported leaving me to die, despite everything that made cruelty easier than kindness. I made one choice," Marcus corrected gently. "Everything else came from the choices other people made afterward. Your choice to trust me, your father's choice to pursue peace, the choice every human and Zephyrian has made to give cooperation a chance instead of defaulting to conflict." Krex stood and moved to the balcony railing, his massive form silhouetted against the morning sky where human and Zephyrian aircraft shared the same flight paths in perfect coordination. Perhaps that is the real lesson. Individual choices matter, but they only change the galaxy when others choose to build upon them. A group of children ran through the garden below, their laughter carrying clearly in the still air. Marcus could see both human and Zephyrian youngsters playing together with the unconscious ease that only children possessed. They had never known a time when the two species were at war, and their friendships represented the future both races were building together. "Those children will grow up in a galaxy where cooperation is normal," Marcus said. "Where working together across species lines is just what civilized beings do. They'll probably think we were crazy for spending 15 years trying to kill each other." "Good," Krex replied firmly. "Let them think war was madness. Let them build something better than we ever imagined possible." As the morning progressed toward afternoon, Marcus found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. From a battlefield soaked in blood to a peaceful colony where former enemies lived as neighbors and friends. From a wounded alien warrior he could have left to die to a partnership that was about to explore the unknown reaches of space. The galaxy had indeed changed, but not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It had changed through small acts of courage, individual decisions to choose compassion over cruelty, and the gradual recognition that cooperation could achieve what conquest never could. Every human who chose to see Zephyrians as people rather than enemies, every Zephyrian who chose to learn from human examples of mercy, had contributed to building something unprecedented in galactic history. 6 months later, as Marcus and Krex stood together on the bridge of the joint exploration vessel New Dawn, watching stars that no one from either species had ever seen before, Marcus reflected on how far they had all come. The ship's crew included the best and brightest from both races, working together with seamless efficiency towards shared goals of discovery and understanding. "New star systems ahead," reported Lieutenant Sofia Reyes, the human navigation officer. "Long-range sensors detect at least 12 potentially habitable worlds. Fascinating stellar formations," added Zephyrian science officer Thex Morkalen. "Gravitational anomalies suggest possible artificial structures." Marcus exchanged glances with Krex, both recognizing the excitement in their crew's voices. Whatever they found in the unknown regions of space, they would discover it together as partners and friends. The wounded alien warrior who had once been prepared to die alone on a distant battlefield now stood beside the human soldier who had refused to let that happen, both of them leading their peoples toward a future bright with infinite possibility. The galaxy stretched before them, vast and full of wonders waiting to be explored by those brave enough to choose cooperation over conflict, understanding over hatred, and hope over fear. And at the heart of that exploration was a simple truth that had changed everything. Sometimes the most important battles are won not by defeating enemies, but by choosing to see them as potential friends. Behind them, dozens of thriving alliance worlds continued the great work of building an interspecies civilization based on mutual respect and shared dreams. Ahead of them, unknown space waited to reveal its secrets to explorers who had learned that the greatest discoveries came not from conquest, but from the courage to trust former enemies with your life and future. The wounded alien warrior had been saved by human mercy. In return, he had helped save both their species from the darkness of eternal war. Now they sailed together toward tomorrow, proving that even in the vast darkness of space, hope could light the way home.